What if a single letter, folded small and burned to ash before dawn, could bend the fate of a kingdom? What if the weight of a whisper, carried across half a continent, could decide who lives and who falls? These are the questions that settle over Winterfell in the quiet days after the royal party begins its slow preparations to leave, and they are questions that Eddard Stark does not yet know he must answer. The great host that arrived with such thunder has grown restless. Horses are being shod, wagons packed, banners folded away for the long road south. The king has departed already for his hunt, riding out with his hounds and his wine and his boisterous companions. And in the hollow he leaves behind, the castle breathes a little easier. But there is no peace in it, not truly, for Catelyn Stark carries a secret that has burned in her since it arrived, and she has resolved, at last, to share its weight. She finds her husband in the solar. The fire is low. The stones hold the cold the way they always do in the north, and Ned stands near the hearth with the careful stillness of a man who has learned that stillness is often the wisest counsel. She tells him of her sister's letter. She tells him of the cipher only the two of them could read, the language of two girls raised together in River Run, and of the accusation folded within it. The Lannisters, Lysa claims, murdered Jon Arryn, poisoned him, silenced the hand of the king before he could speak whatever truth he had uncovered. Ned does not react the way a lesser man might. He does not shout. He does not pace. He turns the accusation over in his mind, the way a smith turns a blade in the forge light, searching for the flaw hidden in the steel. If it is true, then his old friend was murdered. If it is true, then he has walked willingly into the same court that did the killing, and he has accepted the very office that got Jon Arryn buried. And if it is not true, if it is the fevered invention of a grieving widow, then he risks everything on a shadow. He asks her how such a thing could be proven, and here Catelyn gives him the name, Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, a friend, she calls him, a man she has known since childhood, a man who holds a seat on the small council as master of coin, and who might, from within the walls of King's Landing, confirm what her sister only suspects. She says the name with something soft beneath it, something that Ned marks even if he does not name it aloud. She speaks of the boy who grew up beside her at River Run, the ward of her father, the small, quick, clever thing who loved her once and lost to a better man in a duel he never should have fought. Ned listens, and Ned calculates, because this is what he must do now, whether he was born to it or not. He asks her, plainly, what manner of man Petyr Baelish has become, and Catelyn, to her credit, does not lie to him. She tells him that Petyr has risen far and fast, higher than his small holdings should ever have carried him, and that no man climbs so quickly in that nest of vipers without knowing how to trade in the one currency the capital truly values: secrets. He deals in them. He buys them, sells them, hoards them, and he has grown wealthy and powerful on the appetites of others. And Ned sees it then, the danger. He is being asked to place the safety of his family, the truth of a murder, perhaps the peace of the realm itself, into the hands of a man whose entire craft is the manipulation of trust, a man who profits from the very poison of the court that Ned has been asked to enter. He does not say this to Catelyn. He does not wish to wound her, and he knows that childhood affection is a stubborn thing, that logic rarely dislodges. But he marks the name, he marks the shape of the danger, and he sets it aside, unresolved, the way a general sets aside a report he does not yet fully believe. He might have let it rest there. He might have carried his doubts south and weighed against the man himself when they met. But that same evening, before the fire has burned to embers, word comes to him by an unexpected road. A stable boy, one of the youngest, sent to muck the royal horses, come to the maester with a thing that troubled him enough to speak it. "The lord from the south," he says, the small one with the mockingbird on his cloak. He has not ridden away with the others. He lingers. He walks the yards when he thinks no one watches, and he asks questions. Soft ones, careful ones. How did the young lord fall from the tower? Was anyone with him? Which of Lord Stark's men would ride to the capital, and which would stay behind to guard the castle? The maester brings the words to Ned, and Ned holds them in silence. He does not finish the thought aloud. He does not need to, for a man who has not yet left, who lingers where he has no cause to linger, asking after a fall that was called an accident, and after the disposition of Stark's swords, that is not the behavior of a friend. That is the behavior of a spider, testing the strands of a web he has already begun to weave. Ned rises, and the cold in the room deepens. Consider the fire in the boy's chamber. It had been set by careful hands, a small blaze in the library tower, meant to draw the guards, meant to empty the corridors, meant to leave one comatose child alone with the darkness and a man who carried a knife. And it had nearly worked. The cat's paw came in the smoke and the confusion, and he came for Bran, and only the mother's refusal to leave her son's bedside placed her body between the blade and the boy. Her hands closed on the steel. The direwolf did the rest. When the guards found them, the assassin lay with his throat torn open, and Catelyn Stark stood with her palms cut to the bone, holding a weapon so fine it did not belong in the hands of a common cutthroat. That was the first wrongness. Ned turned it in his mind before he turned it in his hands. A hired killer does not carry treasure to a murder. He carries something cheap, something forgettable, something no one will trace should he drop it in his flight. And yet this man had come armed with a blade of Valyrian steel, its hilt dressed in dragonbone, its edge dark as a moonless night, and sharper than any Winterfell smith could grind. Someone had paid this creature in silver to do murder, and someone had, foolishly, put a king's ransom into his grip to do it with. Ned did not believe in that kind of carelessness. He believed in intention, so he did not ride south with the question. He kept it. He sent for Maester Luwin and set the old man to the slow work of tracing the blade. Where such a weapon might last have changed hands, in what wager it might have been lost, at whose table, on what night, before what witnesses. A knife like this had a history. Every fine thing did, and a history could be walked backward, step by patient step, until it arrived at a name. But first there was the spider still lingering in his walls. He summoned Petyr Baelish to the Godswood, and he chose the place with purpose. There were no servants beneath the heart tree, no listeners at the doors, for there were no doors, only the red leaves whispering, and the black pool holding the sky, and the old gods watching with their carved and weeping face. A man lied more easily beneath a painted ceiling in the south than beneath the eyes of the north. Ned wanted him uncertain of the ground. Littlefinger came smiling, and he came ready. Ned laid the dagger on the moss between them and asked a single question: "Whose blade is this?" And here the trap sprang shut, though only one man in the Godswood knew it had been laid. For Petyr Baelish did not hesitate. He did not frown, did not gaze at the steel, did not ask to hold it, or turn it to the light, or search his memory for a night half forgotten. The answer came at once, whole and polished, as though it had been waiting behind his teeth for a summons it always knew would come. He had lost it, Baelish said, in a wager during the tourney of Prince Joffrey's name day. Lost it to Tyrion Lannister, the imp, who had bet on Sir Jaime in the joust and won the knife when Sir Loras unhorsed the Kingslayer's rival. A tidy tale, a tale with a name at the end of it, and a Lannister name at that, delivered clean and quick and gift-wrapped for a grieving father hungry for someone to blame. And that was the second wrongness, and it was greater than the first. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. Ned Stark was no player of these games, but he had spent long years learning men in war and in council, and he knew the shape of a truth. Truth came slowly. Truth came with hesitation, with the reaching for a memory, with the small, honest fumbling of a man dredging his recollection for a night long past. This was not that. This was a story that had been written before the question was asked. This was a man who had rehearsed his lines and now performed them, waiting for applause. And Ned understood, in the cold quiet beneath the weirwood, that a man who has prepared the answer to a murder before the murder is even mentioned is not a witness. He is an architect. The blade had not convicted Tyrion Lannister. The eagerness had convicted Petyr Baelish. For why should this man, who had lingered where he had no cause to linger, who had asked soft questions of stable boys, have his tale so ready, so complete, so conveniently pointed at the one house in the realm most likely to set a father and a queen at each other's throats? Ned said nothing of what he saw. He let the smile remain on Baelish's face. He thanked him, quietly, for his memory, and he watched the small man bow and turn and walk back toward the yard where the royal train prepared to depart, the mockingbird bright upon his cloak, believing his work well done. But something had shifted in the north that morning, and Baelish did not feel it move. Ned watched him go, and for the first time, he understood that the danger in this business was not the knife at all. The danger was the man who had known exactly whose hand to place it in. What if the departure never came? What if the horses were unsaddled, the wheelhouse rolled back into shadow, and the small man with the mockingbird upon his cloak found the gates of Winterfell closed, not against an enemy, but against himself? Ned did not shout the order. He did not need to. A word to Sir Roderick was enough, and within the hour Petyr Baelish sat not in the yard among the royal train, but in a stone chamber high in the great keep, a fire burning small in the hearth, two Northmen standing at the door, with hands resting easy on their axes. The window was narrow, the walls were thick, and the courtesy with which he had been escorted there had been perfect, unhurried, and impossible to refuse. For a time, Baelish waited. He was good at waiting. He counted the ways this could unfold, arranged them, weighed each against the others, as a moneylender weighs coins. He had been detained before. He had talked his way free before. He assumed he would again, because that was the shape of the world as he understood it, a place where every man had a price, and every wall had a door, and Petyr Baelish had always known where the door was hidden. But the North does not bargain the way the South bargains, and Ned Stark did not come to threaten. He came to ask. They brought the cat's paw first. The captured man, the assassin who had climbed the tower with a Valyrian steel blade in his fist, was hauled again before Maester Luwin, and this time there was a third figure in the chamber Baelish had not expected. A merchant, a dour Northman with ink-stained fingers and a memory for metal, who had dealt in coin along the White Knife for 30 years and knew the marks that money carried the way a shepherd knows his flock. And when the coins taken from the cat's paw's purse were laid upon the table, the merchant did not hesitate. He named the moneylender who had cut them. He named the tallies scratched into their edges, and he traced their passage, coin by coin, through a chain of hands that ended, unmistakably, in the purse of a man who had come north with the king's train. Baelish's face did not change, but something behind his eyes began, very quietly, to calculate faster. He tried Tyrion first. It was the prepared move, the move he had brought with him, and he played it with the smoothness of long rehearsal. The imp had wagered the blade at a tourney and lost it, he said, and who else would send an assassin north but a Lannister with a grudge and gold to spare? It was a good story. It was the story he had built the whole architecture of his plan upon, and it landed on the Northmen in that chamber like a stone dropped into deep water, sinking without a ripple. Because the North does not fear the name Lannister. The North fears no name at all, save perhaps the old gods and the coming cold. Baelish saw it then, saw it in the flat, unmoved faces of the men around him, and he understood that the currency he had carried all his life had no value here. His cleverness bought nothing. His connections bought nothing. Sir Roderick Castle stood by the wall with his whiskers bristling, and the word trial had been spoken, and the words by combat had followed it, and Petyr Baelish was not a man who won with a sword. So he did what men do when every calculated path collapses at once. He reached for the last thing he owned that anyone in that room might want. The whole truth about Jon Arryn, he said. That was worth his life, surely. That was worth more than the life of a man who dealt in stolen daggers. Give him his freedom, or his passage south, or merely his continued breathing, and he would give Lord Stark the thing Lord Stark had truly come to King's Landing to find. And then, believing he was buying, he began to spend. He spoke of the letter Lysa had sent. He spoke of the tears of Lys, the poison, the hand that had administered it, the widow who had loved him once and would do murder at his whispered urging. He spoke of it all with the fluency of a man who had held these secrets close and warm for years. And too late, far too late, he heard the sound of his own voice in that quiet stone room and understood what he had done. He had meant to sell knowledge. Instead, he had confessed to possessing it. No innocent man knew the shape of Jon Arryn's death so intimately. No bystander could name the poison and the hand that poured it. He had proven not that he could help. He had proven that he had been there, in the design, from the beginning. The chamber went still. Ned Stark rose. He gave no verdict. He named no sentence. He looked at the small man a long moment, and then he turned to Sir Roderick and spoke low, and the order was not death, and was not mercy, but something narrower and more careful than either. Double the guard, bar the window. See that Petyr Baelish lives to see the sun, for at dawn Winterfell would decide whether this man belonged to the king's justice or to the wolves, and Ned would not let the night steal that choice from him. What does a man do with a truth too dangerous to carry and too dangerous to release? This was the question Ned Stark took with him into the long dark of that night, down the worn stone steps, into the crypts beneath Winterfell. or the cold was older than any living memory, and the dead kept their silent counsel among the pillars. He carried a single torch. The flame trembled in the still air and cast the stone kings of winter into shifting shapes, their faces half seen, their eyes carved deep and empty. He walked past them without pausing, past his brother Brandon, past the space that would one day be his own, until he came to the statue of his father. Rickard Stark looked down at him with a stone patience that the living man had never possessed. Ned stood before him and said nothing for a long while. The words came slowly when they came at all. He spoke of the South and its poisons, of the way a lie could travel further than any horse and cut deeper than any blade. He spoke of his father's own journey south, the summons to a false trial, the fire and the noose, the price of trusting men who smiled while they measured your throat. He did not say it aloud, but he thought it plainly enough that the thought had the weight of speech. His father had died because he had walked into the lion's den believing that honor was armor. It was not armor. It had never been armor. And so the calculation began, cold and methodical, the way such things must be reasoned by a man who does not enjoy them. Petyr Baelish, alive, was a weapon, not a sword, not a spear, but something worse, a tongue that could shape falsehoods into the appearance of truth and set them loose in the ears of kings. Send him south to King's Landing, and every secret Ned held would find its way into the hands of those who wished him dead. Baelish would trade the knowledge of Bran's fall, of the dagger, of the conspiracy against Jon Arryn, and he would trade it not to help but to profit, selling each piece to whoever paid the highest coin. A man like that did not stay bought. He belonged to no one but himself, and a creature that belonged to no one could not be trusted to any oath. To let him live was to arm every enemy Ned had not yet met. There was gold in it, Baelish had promised. There was information, alliance, a future where the two of them stood together against the Lannisters. Ned turned each offer over in his mind and found the same rot at the center of all of them. Gold bought nothing from a man who valued nothing above his own survival. Information given by such a source was a hook baited to lead him into the dark. And alliance with Petyr Baelish was the alliance of the wolf and the serpent, ended always the same way, with venom in the blood. He climbed the stairs before dawn, with his decision made. The household assembled in the great hall as the gray light crept through the high windows. Catelyn stood at his side, her face pale, her hands folded against the cold. She had known this man since they were children in the Riverlands, had watched him grow from a boy who loved her too much into something she did not recognize. She did not speak. She understood what her husband meant to do, and though it grieved her, she did not raise her voice against it. They brought Baelish forward between two guards. He had spent the night composing himself, and he wore his composure like a fine cloak, though it fit him poorly now. Ned pronounced the words plainly, as a warden of the North must. Petyr Baelish, called Littlefinger, was found guilty of conspiracy in the murder of Lord Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, and of conspiracy in the attempted assassination of Brandon Stark, a child in his own bed. For these crimes, the sentence was death. The small man's composure cracked. The offers came fast then, tumbling over one another, gold and secrets and the names of enemies, the promise of a Lannister queen laid bare, and a kingdom delivered. Ned listened to none of it. He had heard it all in the crypts already, weighed it there against the stone silence of his father, and found it wanting. He gave no answer. There is no answer that a man owes to a serpent begging in the dust. They led Baelish to the block in the yard, where ice waited, that great pale blade older than the crimes it now avenged. Ned took it in both hands. He would not give this death to another. A man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He set the edge to the small man's neck, and Petyr Baelish looked up one final time, and whatever last scheme moved behind those clever eyes died there unspoken, for the blade fell and the head fell with it, and the schemes fell silent forever. Catelyn closed her eyes. When she opened them, she felt not grief alone, but something colder and clearer beneath it, the recognition of a mercy her children would never know they had been given. Ned wiped the blade and turned to the maester. "Record it plainly," he said. "Northern justice. Nothing more. What if the most dangerous weapon a man could carry south was not a sword, but a confession sealed in wax?" Ned Stark rode from Winterfell with such a weapon folded against his chest, wrapped in oilcloth beneath his riding leathers, and he was more aware of its weight than of any blade upon his hip. It was a thing of parchment and ink, of words spoken by a dying man and set down by two honest witnesses. Maester Luwin had recorded it in his careful hand, and Sir Roderick Castle had signed beneath it, and the wax bore the direwolf of House Stark pressed deep. A confession, not a rumor, not a suspicion born in the dark corners of grief. Testimony, witnessed and sealed, naming the murder of Jon Arryn and gesturing toward the throne that had wanted him silenced. This was the difference. This was everything. For in another telling of this tale, a man rides south carrying only questions, only the ghost of a poisoned book and a wife's whispered fears, and he is met at every turn by a smiling man who knows more than he says and says less than he knows. In that telling, the smiling man holds all the threads and gives Ned only the strands that lead him deeper into the maze. But there is no smiling man now. There is only silence, where Littlefinger's whispers used to live. And silence, Ned would learn, changes the shape of a court. He came into King's Landing beneath a sky the color of old bronze, and the smell of the city rose to meet him, and he did not love it. He had never loved it. But he went to his duty, and his duty led him to the small council chamber, where the seats of power sat arranged like pieces upon a board, and one seat was empty, the Master of Coin's seat. No one filled it. No one had filled it in the weeks since a certain man vanished from a road that should have carried him home. The crown's ledgers sat untended, its debts unmanaged, its clever accounts unbalanced by the clever hand that had made them clever in the first place. Varys noticed. Varys always noticed. The spider had built his understanding of Ned Stark upon a foundation that no longer held. The Stark was meant to arrive ignorant, honest, and alone. A decent man walking blind into a nest of vipers, easily read because so easily predictable. But this Stark carried a sealed confession. This Stark had already killed the man who was supposed to become his shadow and his guide. And so Varys did what Varys did best. He recalculated. He tested. A word here, a soft courtesy there, a small offered truth to see whether it would be received as friendship or as threat. He did not commit. He never committed. He simply moved a single piece one square forward and watched to see how the board responded. Ned went to Robert before he went to anyone. He found the king amid the wreckage of a feast, half in his cups, and he laid the confession upon the table between them. Robert read it. or he read enough of it. He laughed at parts, waved others away with a wine-stained hand, called Baelish a scheming little coin counter, and said good riddance to the man who had never been worth the air he breathed. But Jon Arryn's name he could not laugh away. Jon Arryn had raised him. Jon Arryn had been a father where his own had failed, and to see that name written beside the word murdered stilled even Robert's roaring good humor. Poison, Robert said, and the word sat heavy in his mouth. You believe this? I believe enough of it to fear the rest, Ned answered. Robert did not shout. That, more than anything, told Ned how deep the wound went. He said instead, in a low and dangerous voice, that Ned should find the truth of it, and find it quietly, and tell no one what he searched for until he could lay the whole of it bare. Not the council, not the queen, no one. Discover it, he said, before they know it is being discovered. He did not say who they were. He did not need to. And far across the Red Keep, in chambers hung with crimson and gold, the queen sat with news that had reached her by a slower road than she was accustomed to. Petyr Baelish was gone. Not delayed, not traveling, gone. Vanished somewhere between the capital and the north, and no raven, no rider, no whispered word explained it. Cersei Lannister turned this over in her mind, the way one turns a coin, whose weight has suddenly changed, and she felt something she was unused to feeling, a cold place, an absence where a certainty had been. She had never trusted Littlefinger, but she had counted on him. He was a shield she had never thought to name until the moment it slipped from her arm, and only then did she understand how many blows he had quietly turned aside, how many threads he had held that now hung loose. Someone had removed him from the board, someone in the north, and her brother's oldest friend was riding south to sit at the king's right hand. She rose from her chair, and her fingers tightened, and she began, for the first time, to be afraid. Fear, in the queen, did not soften into paralysis. It sharpened. It became motion. She summoned Grand Maester Pycelle to her chambers within the hour, and the old man came shuffling in his heavy chains, and she asked him what he knew of the finances of the realm, of the ledgers Baelish had kept, of the monies owed and the monies spent. And Pycelle, who had for years contented himself with knowing only what was useful, discovered in that moment that he knew almost nothing at all. The mastery of coin had belonged to one man, and that one man had built his mastery precisely so that no other could hold it. The numbers had lived in Baelish's head, and in ledgers written in a hand that concealed as much as it revealed. Now the head was gone, and the ledgers remained, and no living soul in the Red Keep could read them the way their author had intended. This is the first crack. Understand it well. A kingdom does not fall because it owes gold. Kingdoms have always owed gold. A kingdom trembles when the man who understood the debt is no longer there to disguise it. Baelish had not merely borrowed. He had borrowed against phantoms, moved sums between accounts that existed only on parchment, paid old creditors with new loans, and called the arithmetic prosperity. It was a structure of breathtaking cleverness, and like all such structures, it required its architect to remain standing beside it, adjusting, patching, whispering reassurances to the Iron Bank and to the Lannisters alike. Remove the architect. Watch what happens. The whole edifice does not collapse at once. It simply ceases to be understood, and what cannot be understood cannot be hidden. Ned Stark sat in the small council chamber with the great books spread before him, and beside him stood Varys, soft and patient, offering a word here, a clarification there, guiding the hand's eye without ever appearing to lead it. The eunuch had his own reasons, as the eunuch always did. But for the moment, his reasons and Ned's ran along the same road. And what Ned saw in those pages was staggering. 6 million gold dragons owed, half of it to House Lannister. He read the figure twice, and then a third time, as though repetition might reduce it. It did not. The crown that Robert wore, the throne Robert claimed to sit upon in triumph, was in truth a debtor's chair, and the largest hand holding the debt belonged to the family of the queen. Consider what a lesser man might have done with this. A schemer would have seen leverage. A Baelish would have seen 100 ways to profit from the tension between a bankrupt king and his creditor wife. But Ned Stark was not a schemer, and this, in the strange arithmetic of the moment, made him more dangerous than any schemer could be. He did not look at the debt and think of gain. He looked at it and thought of pattern. Why does House Lannister hold the crown's throat so gently? Why has Tywin Lannister, who forgives nothing and forgets less, permitted the debt to grow rather than call it in? A creditor who does not demand payment is a creditor purchasing something other than gold. Influence, position, a daughter on the throne and grandchildren in the line of succession. The gold was not a loan. The gold was an investment, and investments expect returns. The thought settled into him slowly, the way cold settles into stone. He had come to this city following the death of Jon Arryn, and Jon Arryn had died shortly after taking an interest in these very questions, in a book of lineages, in the coloring of royal children, in the parentage of those who would inherit. And now Ned held in his hands the shape of a Lannister design that stretched across years, and the murdered hand who had glimpsed it, and the queen whose brother had thrown his son from a tower. The pieces did not scatter before him. They aligned. Without Littlefinger to muddy the waters, without a second conspiracy weaving false trails through the true, Ned Stark saw a single clean line running from Robert's crushing debt to the golden children who called him father. And he began to suspect that they were not Robert's children at all. Across the castle, Cersei Lannister waited for word that did not come. In the history that might have been, she would have known the shape of Ned's thoughts, almost as they formed them. For Baelish's girls in Baelish's houses had ears against every wall, and what those ears gathered flowed to the Lannisters as surely as water flows downhill. That river had gone dry. She sent servants who returned with nothing. She listened at the doors of her own intuition and heard only silence where whispers had once lived. She believed Ned Stark to be a slow northern fool, honest and blunt, and years behind the game. She could not see how much he already knew, because the men who might have told her were scattered, or dead, or simply not there. She misjudged him. Badly. She thought she had time to prepare her defense, and all the while, in a chamber lit by tallow and lined with ledgers, the hand of the king was closing the last distance to a truth that would break her. The truth, when it came to him, came the way truth always came to Eddard Stark. Slowly, plainly, without drama or flourish. He read the old book that Jon Arryn had read before him, the great dusty lineages of the noble houses bound in cracked leather, and he traced the seed of Baratheon down through the generations. Black of hair, every last one of them, black of hair, going back and back through the years to the very founding of the line. Robert's brothers, black of hair. Robert's bastards, wherever he had scattered them, black of hair and blue of eye, and stamped with the stag's stubborn brow. And Joffrey, golden. Golden as a Lannister coin, golden as his mother and her twin. He closed the book. He understood. This was the same understanding that had killed Jon Arryn. The same 3 words the old man had spoken before he died. The seed is strong. And in the history that might have been, Ned would have carried this knowledge straight into the arms of the man who was waiting to betray him, a man who would nod and counsel and smile, and then, at the critical moment, hold a dagger to his throat in the throne room, while gold cloaks changed their allegiance mid-breath. But that man was ash now, scattered somewhere beyond the walls of Winterfell, and the gold cloaks who might have been bought had no buyer to answer to. So Ned went instead to Varys. The eunuch listened. He always listened. And when Ned had finished, Varys folded his soft powdered hands and spoke of patience, of stability, of the 10,000 people who would die if the realm learned that its crown prince was a child born of incest and treason. He did not tell Ned he was wrong. That was the terrible thing. He told him he was right, and that being right might be the most dangerous thing a man could be. "The realm bleeds, my lord," Varys murmured, "and it is we who are meant to be its physicians, not its butchers. Consider the cost." Ned considered it. He considered it, and then he set it aside, because Eddard Stark had never in his life been able to hold a truth in one hand and a convenient silence in the other. He went to the queen. He found her in the Godswood, beneath the old dead trees the Southrons kept, and he told her what he knew. All of it. He told her because he was a man of honor, and honor demanded she be given the chance to run, to take her children, and vanish into the Golden West before her husband returned to name her crimes. It was a mercy. It was also a mistake, or it would have been, in another telling of this tale. But this telling had already diverged, days ago, in the yard of a castle far to the north, and the ripples of that divergence had spread further than either of them could see. For Robert Baratheon rode to the hunt that morning with a different weight in his mind. The letter from Ned in the Mountain Vale, the one that spoke of Jon Arryn's suspicions, had reached him weeks before, sharpened by the dying words of a confession Ned's men had wrung loose along the way. Robert did not know everything, but he knew enough to be wary. He knew enough that when the wineskins were passed among the hunters, and his squire poured a fresh horn, one of Ned's own men leaned close and spoke a quiet word about the queen's generosity with the vintage. "Be careful, my king." And Robert, who was a fool about many things but not about the taste of betrayal, drank little that day. Drank little and stayed sharper for it. The boar came out of the brush like a black thing born of nightmare. It caught him. It gored him deep, tore through mail and leather and the soft flesh beneath, and Robert Baratheon screamed and bled and fell. But he did not die. A drunken king, wine-slowed and reckless, dies on those tusks. A wary king, blood up and half sober, kills the beast even as it kills a part of him, and lives. They carried him back to the Red Keep gray-faced and raving, the great body wrapped in bandages already soaking through, and he clung to life with the stubbornness that had won him a kingdom. And as the maesters worked over him, and the fever rose and fell, the thing that lived in Robert's mind grew teeth. His wife had not wept enough. His wine had been too full. His old friend Jon Arryn had died too conveniently. And now here was Ned Stark whispering that the prince was no son of his at all. He would not let go of the hand. He kept Ned close, closer than ever, a wounded lion refusing to release the one honest man in a city of liars. And he would not. name the boy his heir, not while doubt sat in his gut like a swallowed blade. In her chambers, Cersei Lannister received the word she had been dreading and disbelieving in equal measure. The king lives, the king suspects, and she understood, in that cold and dawning moment, that the board had been overturned before she ever finished setting her pieces. What does a queen do when the board is overturned? She reaches for the pieces she knows are hers, and she counts them, and she finds the count come short. Cersei Lannister had always understood the true shape of power in King's Landing, not the throne, which was iron and cold, and cut the men who sat it, not the small council, which was old men and their grudges. Power was gold, and gold bought men, and the men that gold bought most reliably were the 2,000 who wore the golden cloaks of the city watch. Command those, and you commanded the streets. Command the streets, and no amount of honor in the Tower of the Hand could save a man once the gates were closed and the alleys grew dark. She had believed those cloaks already purchased. She had believed it because Littlefinger had told her it was so, in his soft and smiling way, in the days when he had been the cleverest man in the city and the deadliest secret she carried. But Littlefinger was 3 weeks dead beneath the walls of Winterfell, and the arrangement he had made now belonged to no one. The bribes had a source, and the source had a grave. Janos Slynt, that ambitious, low-born, thick-necked commander of the Watch, had been promised gold that would never arrive, and a man promised gold that does not arrive is not a bought man, he is merely a hungry one. This is the thing that changed everything, and the Queen understood it too late. A hungry man may be fed by anyone. Ned Stark fed him, not with the crooked coin of a schemer, but with something rarer in that city, an offer that was exactly what it appeared to be: honest wages from the treasury, drawn openly, and behind the wages, the thing no Lannister could counter now that Robert clung to breathing life, the authority of a living king who trusted his hand utterly. Slynt did not love the Starks. Slynt loved himself. But a coward and a climber can read a board as well as any lord, and the board now showed a king who lived and a queen who trembled, and Janos Slynt was not a man to bet his neck on trembling. He took the coin. He did not take all his men with him. The Watch was too fractured, too seeded with old loyalties, but he took enough. Ned secured a portion of the gold cloaks, and a portion was more than Cersei now held. She had counted her pieces. She had come short, and into that shortness, that widening crack in Lannister certainty, walked her brother, who had never in his life learned to count at all. Jaime Lannister loved 3 things: his sister, his sword, and the swift resolution of problems. He had learned that his children's secret was a secret no longer, that Robert lived to hate him, and that somewhere in the tangled news from the north there was a matter involving Tyrion that scraped at his patience like a burr under a saddle. A wiser man would have waited. A colder man would have sat in the Red Keep and let his father's mind, that patient engine grinding away at Casterly Rock, produce a plan. Jaime was neither wise nor cold in that hour. He was a lion who felt the net drawing tight, and a lion in a net does the only thing it knows. He confronted Ned's household guard in the street. Golden and gleaming and certain of himself, he came for the handsmen in the muck of the city he had never truly respected, and he brought his own soldiers to make an end of it. Steel rang in the narrow ways. Men fell. Jory Cassell, who might have died in another telling of this tale, took a wound and kept his feet, and kept his life, dragged clear by his own men. And Jaime, who had been the finest sword in the realm since before he had grown his beard, found that skill is not the same as position. He had thrown himself into a fight he could not simply win his way out of, in a city where the streets no longer answered to his sister's gold, with a living king above and a hand's authority all around. They took him, not slew him. Ned would have no murder done in cold blood, and a captured kingslayer was worth more than a dead one. They took him, and they bore him beneath the Red Keep, into the black cells where the Lannister name meant nothing at all. A hostage, a lion in a cage of a kingdom's making. And far to the west, in the solar at Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister received 3 reports in a single day. His daughter stood accused, his son sat imprisoned beneath his enemy's castle, and Robert Baratheon, who by every plan and every calculation ought to have been safely dead, still drew breath and still hated. Tywin read the parchments once, then again. His face did not change, it never changed, but something behind it shifted for the first time since the rebellion. For the first time in 20 years, House Lannister was not moving the pieces. It was being moved. The lion had spent his life making others react. Now he read the reports a third time and set them down and began, very quietly, to summon his banners, not to seize a kingdom, but to keep the one he had. What if a dying king could still command the loyalty of stone and steel by the simple act of remaining alive? Robert Baratheon had spent his reign as a ghost of the warrior he once was, buried beneath wine and feast and the crushing weight of a throne he never wanted. But there is a difference between a man who wishes he were dead and a man someone tried to kill. The boar had come close, the poison closer still, and now, propped against a mountain of pillows in a chamber that smelled of poultices and old wine, Robert was more awake than he had been in 15 years. Rage, it turned out, was a finer physician than any maester. He convened the hearing in the throne room because he understood, even now, the theater of power. A dying man does not summon a court to his bedside if he wishes to be believed. He rises. He is carried, if he must be, to the seat of judgment, and he speaks from beneath the shadow of the swords his grandfather melted into a chair. The lords of the realm gathered along the walls, and they watched their king breathe with the fixed attention of men, counting the beats of a wounded thing. Ned Stark presented the evidence as a hand should, plainly, without embellishment, letting each fact settle before laying down the next. Here the lineage, the long procession of Baratheon black hair, marching down through generations, unbroken, undeniable, until it reached 3 golden children who bore no trace of it. Here the confession of Jon Arryn, set to parchment before the veil claimed him, naming the truth he had died holding. Here the testimony of the streets themselves, where Jaime Lannister had drawn steel against the hand of the king in open daylight, a golden lion baring his teeth for all the city to see. Each piece alone might be dismissed. Together they formed a shape that no lord in that room could pretend not to recognize. Cersei sat rigid upon the dais, and behind the cool composure of her face, the calculations ran without pause. She had 1 card left. She had always kept 1 card. If Robert died before he could speak the words that would unmake her children, the accusation became noise. The confession became the ravings of a jealous man. And Joffrey remained a king whom no court could unseat. And so, Even as her husband gathered his breath to condemn her, she reached for the last move on the board. A servant, a cup, a pinch of something folded into a scrap of cloth. It was the same play she had run before, and it had nearly worked before, and desperation has a way of making people trust the tools that once failed them. But the board had changed. Ned had tightened every ring of security around the king until a fly could not have crossed the threshold unremarked. And Varys, that soft, powdered spider who served whichever cause promised the realm the least blood, had his little birds nested in every corner of the Red Keep. The poisoner never reached the cup. He was taken in the corridor, the cloth still folded in his palm. And when the questions began, he did what frightened men do. He named the hand that had paid him. He named the queen. The confession landed in the throne room like a stone into still water. And this was the exquisite cruelty of the moment. Cersei had not needed to be proven guilty of incest. That charge required a lord to believe a claim about hair and blood. But regicide, the attempt to murder her own husband in the very hour of her trial, required only a captured man and the fear in his voice. She had reached for a weapon, and it had turned in her hand and opened her throat. The lion who prided herself on always striking first had struck once too often. Robert did not shout. Those who expected the old thunder were disappointed. He looked at the woman he had married to bind two great houses, and something in his ruined face was almost gentle, the gentleness of a man beyond caring. He named Stannis, his brother, grim and unloved and utterly, tediously lawful. Stannis, who wanted the throne the way a man wants a debt repaid, without joy, but with absolute certainty of his right. Robert named him heir, and stripped the golden children of every claim, and ordered Cersei confined to her chambers under guard until the king's justice could be done. And in that instant, across the room, the mathematics of loyalty rearranged themselves. The Lannister bannermen had come to King's Landing prepared to defend a queen wronged by jealous Northmen. They had not come to defend proven incest and attempted murder of an anointed king. These were different things. A man might risk his lands and his sons for a slander. He will not spend them for a crime he can no longer deny. One by one, quietly, without speeches, certain lords found reasons to stand farther from the dais, to catch no eye, to remember pressing business in the West. The support did not shatter. It seeped away, like water through cupped fingers, and every drop that fell left Tywin Lannister's cause a little more alone. In his solar at Casterly Rock, the reports were still arriving, and each one was worse than the last. What does a man do when he has already lost, and knows it, and cannot yet say the word aloud, even to himself? Tywin Lannister reads the reports in the failing light of his solar, and he does the arithmetic he has always done, the cold sums that have never once betrayed him. He counts spears. He counts gold, of which he has more than any man in the realm. He counts the sworn swords of the West, the mountain clans, the household knights, the levies that Casterly Rock can raise from 100 villages. And then, because he is honest in the way that only truly ruthless men can afford to be, he counts what stands against him. A king who lives, a queen convicted, an heir named, and the whole weight of a realm that has decided, without any single dramatic moment, that House Lannister is in the wrong. That last figure is the one that cannot be paid down with gold. In the true telling of things, Tywin had waged a different war entirely, a war of vengeance for a father captured, a war fought under the banner of grievance, with the Riverlands his to burn, and the Freys his to buy, and the North his to break at a wedding feast. He had waged that war with the wind at his back, because legitimacy is wind, and he had it. Now the wind blows the other way. Now the letters that arrive at the rock are not offers of alliance but polite silences, lords who do not write, banners that do not muster, the long empty spaces where support should be and is not. Kevin comes to him in the gray hour before dawn, when the fires have burned low and the honesty comes easier. Kevin, who has followed his brother through every campaign, who has never once questioned the direction of the march, he questions it now. There is no throne at the end of this road, Kevin says. He does not raise his voice. He never has. There never was, brother. Cersei destroyed that possibility the moment she poured the poison. We are not fighting to win. We are fighting only to lose more slowly. Tywin does not answer at once. He is watching the reports curl at their edges near the brazier, the wax seals softening, the words beginning to blur. To the east, the pieces are already moving. Robb Stark rides south with the strength of the north behind him, and here the alternate current runs deepest of all, because Robb rides not as a boy king crowned in fury, but as a son answering his lord father's summons, honorably, under his liege's banner, with nothing to avenge and everything to gain. Ned Stark lives, Ned Stark commands, and Robb, who in another life would have marched south grief-mad and desperate and brilliant and doomed, marches instead into a winning cause, his levies fresh, his cause clean, his father waiting to meet him, not in a crypt, but in a war council. The river lords see this. The Freys, above all, see this. Walder Frey is many things, but he is not a man who wagers his house on the losing side. In the true history he had gambled, weighed a boy king's cause against a lion's gold, and chosen betrayal because the boy was already failing. Here there is no gamble to make. The royal cause is ascendant, the Stark cause is lawful, and the crossing at the twins opens without a single blade drawn or a single guest wronged. The war is denied its bloodiest turn simply because the arithmetic of treachery no longer favors it. Some men are loyal because it is right. More men are loyal because it is profitable. Walder Frey is the second kind, and the second kind is enough. The combined host meets Tywin's in the Riverlands, on ground that gives the Lannisters nothing, and the battle is short. It is short because Tywin's men fight knowing what their commander already knows, and men who fight for survival rather than victory fight differently than men who believe. The line bends, the line breaks. Tywin withdraws his host in good order because he is Tywin, and even in defeat he does not permit a rout. But he leaves the field, and the field was the last thing he could afford to leave. Back at the rock, the proud voices demand a final stand. Let the Western lords die with steel in their hands beneath the golden lion. Let it be said that House Lannister did not kneel. Tywin listens to them. He has always listened to men who mistake pride for strategy, because such men are useful right up until the moment they are fatal. And then he does the last calculation. He weighs the death of his house against its survival. He weighs the song men will sing of a glorious last stand against the fact that no one sings songs to the dead about the dead. He weighs Cersei, already lost, against Jaime, against Tyrion, against the rock itself, and the gold beneath it, and the name that has ruled the West for 1,000 years. There is one victory left. Only one, not the throne, not the war, the survival of House Lannister. He looks at Kevin across the low fire, and for the first time in the long campaign, something in his face gives way. Not softness, never that, but the terrible clarity of a man choosing which of his losses he can bear. "Send for parchment," he says, "and a writer we can trust." What if surrender, when done correctly, is not defeat, but the final and most difficult chess move a great player ever makes? The writer carries no banners. He carries only parchment sealed with the sigil of the lion, and he rides south through country that has already begun to forget the war, past fields where men have returned to their plows because hunger does not care which king sits the Iron Throne. The terms he carries are precise. Tywin has drafted them the way he drafts everything, with an eye toward what remains rather than what is lost. He offers the crown the thing it most requires, which is an ending without a siege, a peace without the burning of Casterly Rock, a resolution that lets Robert claim victory without spending 10,000 more men to take a mountain of stone and gold. And in exchange, he asks only that his house continue to exist, not to rule, not to reign, merely to endure. In King's Landing, the terms are read aloud in a small council chamber that has been swept clean of the men who once filled it. The chairs have new occupants. The corruption that fed on the crown like a slow rot has been cut away, and what remains is something Robert Baratheon has not possessed in 15 years, a court that tells him the truth. He listens to the terms with Ned Stark at his side, and he does the arithmetic that kingship has never come naturally to him. He weighs vengeance against gold. He weighs the satisfaction of grinding the lions into dust against the debt owed to the Iron Bank, a debt that grows heavier with every day the treasury bleeds. And for once, chastened by his own near murder, and by the years of blindness that let treachery flourish under his own roof, he chooses the ledger over the grudge. The Lannisters come to the capital in a slow procession that is neither triumph nor humiliation, but something colder, the orderly dismantling of a threat. Cersei arrives last. She has known for weeks what waits for her, and she has spent those weeks constructing the face she will wear, the proud and unbroken mask of a queen who refuses to acknowledge that she is no longer one. It does not matter. The judgment has already been calculated, and it falls on her with the weight of inevitability rather than malice. Her marriage is annulled. Her children are declared what they have always secretly been, not the seed of the king, but the fruit of a sin so old it has calcified into fact. She is remanded to a sept, and beyond it, exile, not death. Death would make her a martyr, and the men who now advise Robert are too careful for that. They give her the one punishment she cannot transform into a legend. They make her small. But there is mercy in the arithmetic, and it lands where mercy costs nothing and gains much. Tommen and Myrcella are spared. Children cannot be blamed for the manner of their conception, and dead children make for dangerous ghosts, so they are stripped of royal standing and remanded as wards, divided between Stark honor and Tyrell ambition, hostages dressed in the softer word of guardianship. They will grow up far from thrones. They will grow up alive. Jaime's fate is the cleanest cut of all, because it accomplishes three things at once. He takes the black. In a single stroke, the Kingslayer is removed from the board. The Rock is denied its most dangerous sword, and the appearance of justice is preserved without the spilling of blood that would demand answering blood. In exchange for his exile to the Wall, Tyrion walks free. The dagger lie that once nearly destroyed a kingdom The lie that Littlefinger carried to his grave, the lie that vanished the moment its author's head left his shoulders, is finally cleared from the dwarf's name. Casterly Rock endures under Kevan's steady stewardship, a lion with its claws filed down but breathing still. And Tywin's final calculation proves correct. The house survives, diminished, chastened, but not erased. And Tyrion, of all the men in that shattered game, finds himself in the last place he ever expected, useful, cleared of guilt, wary of every hand that reaches toward him. He takes a seat at the Reformed Council and begins the slow, unglamorous work of dragging the crown out of the pit its previous keepers dug. He understands numbers the way his father understands power. He knows that a kingdom is only as strong as its ability to pay its debts, and he sets about repaying the Iron Bank on terms that are honest for the first time in a generation. Above them all, Robert and Stannis stand in the same room without weapons drawn, and something older than resentment settles between the brothers. Stannis is heir again, acknowledged, his rigid loyalty finally rewarded rather than resented. Robert clasps Ned by the shoulder and calls him the man who saved a crown its own king had nearly thrown away. The peace holds. For now, it holds. But in a sept across the city, a woman who was once a queen stares at stone walls and begins, very quietly, to count what she has left. The road north is long, and Ned Stark has traveled it in every season of his life. He knows its bends the way a man knows the lines of his own hand, and he rides it now not as a captive of duty, but as a man returning home, with his purpose spent and his conscience, at last, at rest. He declined to remain hand. He had done what was asked, and more, and when the offer came to stay in the capital and shape the realm from its heart, he refused it the way he refuses all things that would keep him from the north. The south is not his country. It never was. And a man who has watched a kingdom nearly consume itself understands that his place is among the people who trust him without needing to be persuaded. The walls of Winterfell rise gray and ancient against a pale sky, and there is snow on the battlements, though winter has not yet fully come. He sees the smoke of the great halls, the movement of guards along the ramparts, the banners of his house snapping in a wind that carries no threat in it, only cold. He rides through the gate, and the yard fills with faces he loves, and every one of them is alive. That is the thing he notices first, before the embraces, before the words. Every one of them is alive. Catelyn meets him at the steps, and the woman, who once feared what his justice might cost them, holds him without hesitation now. She has made her peace with the swing of that sword. She has traced the shape of the world that might have been and found it monstrous. And she no longer wonders whether the price was too high, because she has come to understand what was purchased. A family whole, children who grew rather than perished, a name still honored rather than mocked at a wedding feast that never happened. She holds him, and neither of them speaks of the man who died to make this ordinary evening possible. Bran is awake. He has been awake for some time now, and though his legs will never again carry him up the walls he once climbed, his eyes carry something else, something patient and watchful and older than his years. He learns to live changed. He learns that a body confined is not a spirit confined, and he studies the histories of his house and the ways of the world with a hunger that surprises even the maester. When his father comes to him, he does not weep. He asks questions, as he has always asked questions, and the questions have grown sharper in the quiet of his long recovery. They sit together beneath the heart tree in the godswood where the Starks have prayed for 8,000 years, and the red leaves whisper above them, though no wind stirs. Bran asks the question that has waited all this time to be asked: whether taking one man's life was truly worth all that came after, whether a single death can weigh against the balance of everything. Ned does not answer quickly. He looks across the godswood and beyond it toward the castle where his children move and laugh and quarrel and live, where his bannermen sit at his table in loyalty rather than lying in cold graves along some southern road. He thinks of the war that never came, the crown Robb never took and never had torn from him, the wedding hall that never ran red, the Freys who kept their oaths because there was no chance to break them, the Boltons whose treachery never found its opening because the war that would have loosed it was never lit. He thinks of the man who would have arranged all of it with a smile, who would have whispered kingdoms into ruin for the pleasure of watching them fall, and who died in a cell one gray morning before he could set the first piece moving. Sometimes, he tells Bran, justice delayed becomes injustice for everyone else. He says it slowly because he wants his son to carry it. A man who spares the wolf spares also every sheep the wolf will kill. To hesitate at the necessary thing is not mercy. It is only cowardice wearing mercy's face, and the cost of it is paid by those who never chose it. He held the sword. He looked into the eyes of the man who had already betrayed him once and would betray him 1,000 times more. And he did what a lord must do when the law is his to keep. Bran is quiet for a long while. Then he nods, and something in him settles, the way snow settles over old ground. The leaves whisper. The pool at the base of the tree lies still and dark, and in it, the reflection of a father and his son holds unbroken. Somewhere beyond these walls a realm recovers, slowly, imperfectly, but recovering, because a single dangerous man never lived to break it. The fate of the Seven Kingdoms was not decided by a king, nor a battle, nor a dragon. It was decided in a courtyard, by a man of honor who understood that some prices must be paid at once, and paid in full. Thousands lived because one man did not, and the North, whole and unbetrayed, remembers. Now this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original, or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.